Hello, all you model railroaders out there. This is my first attempt at a live stream, and I thought I would talk about couplers. Now, I got the idea of talking about couplers because Jack Hamilton recently had an article in the NMRA Bulletin about the new Micromark handheld uncoupling picks. They look like this, and you turn them on, they have a battery, and they light up the tip where you uncouple. And I thought, well, we can't talk about uncoupling without talking about coupling first, so let's do that. In case you're not familiar with model railroad couplers, the first thing is, of course, every train has to have the cars coupled together, or it's not going to be a train. Now, the principle of coupling is just like this. You have to have two knuckles that they climb into each other, and of course if you have the knuckles reversed they won't work. They only work one direction. Now, in the old days of model railroading, they used something called a horn hook coupler, which was right when they invented plastic, and they thought this was a clever thing, and the NMRA had a standard about it, and I'll hold it up for you here. Hopefully you can see this. And it is a really bad thing operationally, but you'll still find cars with this horn hook on it, especially if you go to swap meets. But I just wanted to point out that it exists, and you should get rid of it as soon as you see one. Now, the gold standard in couplers are the Katy couplers, and if you are in model railroading for very long, you'll end up with a stack of Katy couplers like I have here, boxes of them in different sizes and for different fittings for different cars. But most of the time you can use a bulk pack like this with 50 pairs of couplers, and you can stick them in your cars and have good functioning couplers. I just wanted to say that in recent years Katy has come out with what are called whisker couplers that center with little whiskers, and I'm sure you can't see this on the video, but there are little tiny whiskers here that make the coupler go back and forth. But in the old days they had something more like this with a brass spring and some kind of a shape like this that went into the brass spring. So these little fingers on the side would move the coupler back and forth. That worked okay, but the new whisker couplers are much better, so I've tried to put those in all my cars whenever possible. Now, of course, since price is so important to people who sell model railroad equipment, they're always trying to find a cheaper version than a Katy coupler, which can run you, $1 a piece or something. So they're always manufacturers are always coming up with these harebrained schemes for couplers that will work as well as Katy's, and I just want to say they never do. And the first thing I do with any car that I take on the layout is to replace the couplers with Katy couplers. Now, here's an example of one type of coupler. They put a little plastic couple of leaves on either side. There's also an imitation Katy where they put a brass centering spring like I showed you before, but which is okay, but it's not as good as the whisker coupler. And if you're lucky, in these imitation Katy couplers, the knuckles will be controlled by a spring, and you can't probably see the spring in here, but there's an actual metal spring making the coupler knuckle move back and forth. Some of them, I can't remember which manufacturers, actually made plastic couplers with plastic leaf springs instead of metal coiled springs, and they're incredibly unreliable, and it's very important to get rid of those. And I have sympathy for the manufacturers trying to keep the unit price down of each car, but it really is a pain to have to change the couplers every time you buy a car, unless the manufacturer charges so much for the car that it comes with the Katie couplers. That can happen. So, you know, here, well, I could show you examples of different cars, but the other thing worth mentioning, since we're talking about couplers, is the number 5 versus the number 58. And of course, the simple way of saying that is there's a standard head that Katie has had for more than 50 years, 70 years, I don't know how long it's been. And the standard head coupler that has a certain size, and we have here's a coupler gauge. I'm holding this up to see if it'll focus properly. This is a coupler height gauge showing, well, no, that's not a number 5. Just a minute, we have a number 5 here somewhere. Yeah, there's a number 5 coupler, and it's in a gauge so you can set the height of it with respect to the track by placing this gauge down on the track and then rolling a car into it. But the number 5, maybe I can do it better with my hand. The number 5 coupler has a certain size, and that's called a standard head, but the scale head is a little smaller, and you probably can't see it with this lack of resolution on my screen, but the scale head is on the left, the standard head is on the right, and you'll see a lot of people talk about whether or not these are compatible, and they'll say, oh, they only go with number 5 and they only go with number 58, the scale head. The standard head on the right and the scale head on the left. My experience is basically that I use both depending on how old the car is or how lazy I am about replacing a coupler. And I've never really had any noticeable problem with some of the cars being the scale head and some being the standard head, the original old standard head. And I even have some cars that one side is the standard head and the other side is the scale head. So, and you know, like I say, I've just never had any trouble with that. The reason that ends up happening is because I have to replace one of the couplers. It falls out of the coupler pocket or something, and I don't bother to replace the other one. As you've probably already seen in my other videos, I can be pretty lazy about doing everything just right. I just try to keep the railroad running. So like I say, I have over 500 cars in operation on this layout, and it's a mixture of number 5s and number 58s, and I've never had any trouble. So that being said, we've talked about the different types of couplers, and basically I'm saying you can try to use plastic couplers, but I always recommend the metal Katie couplers. And I have had experiences, and so have many other model railroaders, where the plastic couplers themselves, the knuckles will even break. And you just don't want that, especially in a hidden staging yard. So now let's talk about the different ways you can uncouple a car. Maybe I'll use a couple of cars over here for demonstration purposes. I think you can see that. The normal way that you see a lot of people do it is with a standard barbecue skewer. And that has a nice sharp pick on it. It's about a 5-inch long barbecue skewer, and you can stick it in between the couplers, flip it a little bit with your hand, and it'll come uncoupled. Now that works pretty well, and you've seen me do it on some of my videos. And I like the way the wood grain on the tip creates a little bit of friction. Now you can also buy a fancy metal prod. And you can see here this metal prod is pretty sharp, and I guess you could use any kind of a sharp tool. And if you go in with a sharp tool and get in between the couplers, that can work too, as you can see. And a couple of years ago I was at an operating session, and somebody was using dental picks with the little fine brushes. And I thought this was pretty clever. because these dental picks have little Christmas tree shaped brushes on them, and they can stick right in between the faces or the knuckles in the coupler, and you just sort of twist them with their brush, and the brush kind of it goes in here and just twists the couplers apart, which is very nice. And then finally, so I have a bunch of these. This particular one is called Dentech, and I ended up using ACC glue, but you could use canopy glue or anything else to actually glue the handle on here so that this wouldn't come apart, because these are designed to be, you know, to protect the tip from being contaminated, since they're normally used for dental work. But there are several different brands of these that you could consider trying. Here's a little bit of a thicker brush. I like a smaller version. I think this is a large size, and the one I was just showing you is medium size. This is a different brand, B&H, that is a side mount, and I thought this would be clever, sticking in the side, but it isn't actually clever, because you want to be able to twist the brush. And so I found that while this is nice to look at, we don't really use these. And in fact, most people use the wood picks because they're used to using the wood picks. So this brings us finally to the new Micromark Lit uncoupling pen. And I'm going to take the camera out of the stand so I can show this to you close up, how fun it is to be able to actually use it on an actual car. There, if you look in here, the light just lights up the uncoupler, and we can stick it right in there and twist it and uncouple the car just like that. Very slick. My only complaint about it is that as it comes from the store or the mail, let's see if I can find the other one I have over here. I'll go back to my stand here. Hopefully you're enjoying this. As it comes from the store, it has a kind of a roundish tip. Hopefully you can see that in the camera. The tip is kind of blunt, and I find this doesn't work too well with the couplers. It's a little too blunt. So I fuss and fuss, and it does eventually work. You can see the blunt tip does work. But I took a file, just a regular file like this, and I took the blunt end and I scraped it with the file to make it more pointed. And that's what happened eventually here, is I got a much more pointed tip. And the pointed tip fits in between the two coupler faces much better. And so you get the advantage of the lit stick as well as the advantage of the pointed tip that you get with a barbecue skewer. So I just got a few of these lit uncoupling picks, and I can't say that we've had operating sessions and that I can report how much people love them, but I think it's a very promising development, especially for jobs on the railroad that involve a lot of uncoupling, such as the three main yardmaster positions. So I think with that, I'm going to sign off for now, and thank you for enjoying this live stream, and we'll see you along. This is Burr Stewart with the Burlington Northern Railroad with 2 R's, and I hope you're enjoying my YouTube channel, where I have a lot of different videos of these yards in action. And thanks and bye.